Yes, sir.
All right, I appreciate the opportunity. As you know, I'm Howard Eagle. I taught 712 Social Studies in the Rochester City School District for 23 years, including the time when you were a student there
Yes,
in,
sir.
in the 90s. I also worked as an adjunct professor in the Department of African American Studies at the State University of New York at Brockport for 19 years. And I've been somewhat of a community activist for 45 years consecutively in the Rochester community. I'm a father, among other things, and just somebody who wants to hopefully help bring about change and improvement, especially and particularly as it relates to the public education system.
Yes, sir. And you've been teaching over how long now?
Well, I taught for 23 years. I actually retired in 2010. I retired from the Rochester City School District in 2010. I had 23 years at that point. And then after that, I taught for 19 years at the State University of New York at Brockport in
Okay.
their Department of African American Studies.
Yes, sir. I've been studying this thing and I had so many notes and everything that I wanted to go over. But let me tell you, the more I read,
Uh-huh.
the more depressed I got.
Yeah, I
The more,
understand.
the more
Understand.
angry I got.
I understand. Yes, sir.
So I'm not in no in particular order. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that and you'll be able to educate me on a couple of things.
Okay.
Um, my first question is, what is the purpose of education?
Well, the typical spiel is to build good citizens and so forth, right? People who are productive citizens who can contribute to society, and that makes sense, and that's correct, right? But in
Right.
my view, education is much deeper than that. I mean, the word itself means to pull out what's in people. To really help us reach our fullest potential. And if we are able to reach our fullest potential, what we would be able to do ideally is to create conditions on this globe in which suffering is eradicated or nearly eradicated. So for me, the uh, essence of education is the ability to think critically about the vital issues that we're facing to the point that, to the extent that we can solve the world's problems and create solutions for humanity. And so that's bigger than the typical line that we hear about, we want to create good citizens, productive citizens, and we
Mhm.
do. We do
Right.
want to do that. But, productive to what end? Because frequently when people say that, they're talking, in terms of being productive as it relates to your own life and your own family members, your own immediate circles. And,
Right.
not, in my view, not enough of us are really committed to the larger goals of trying to eradicate all of the madness that you just mentioned is making you depressed, making you angry, all of those issues and problems that have existed for many years and that are still here with us and don't seem to be getting any better.
Right. Right. So I just want to make one thing clear. We're not here to slander anyone. And some of the notes that and things that I'm going to talk about is going to be from a broader perspective. Because
Sure,
as
sure.
I spoke with you offline, I believe it was yesterday, I talked to teachers in Fort Worth. I talked to teachers in um, Philly,
Uh-huh.
some even here, right here in Phoenix, Arizona. And
Okay.
the thing that I got the most from a lot of them, they don't receive any support from administration. That was one of the main things.
It's a problem. I'm certain that it is a problem throughout the United States. I have to be honest and say when people say we get no support, that's hard to believe.
Hmm.
But obviously, in many cases, educators are not getting adequate support. And there's a whole discussion that needs to be had as to why not, right? Because it's not always a matter of the administrators are not willing to give you the support. They themselves are not capable of supporting you because of the way the system is set up, because of the
Mm,
massive dysfunction in the system.
hmm. Hmm.
So I just don't want us to think that that's some simplistic idea that administrators just don't support teachers.
Right, right.
And in some cases that's true also though, but I
Okay,
don't think that's the general reality. I don't think
okay,
that's the general reality.
okay. Um, who would you say would be responsible for what we see going on in your district? Um, just to give you we had Terry Date. I believe he resigned 10 months before his tender, right?
Yes, he.
And then we had a Leslie stepped in. She resigned.
Well, that let's talk about both of those. So Terry Day resigned 10 months after he took the job.
Yes.
He had a 4-year contract,
Mm,
and he only worked 10 months into that contract.
okay.
His belief system, as he expressed it, was that the board, and this goes to the answer to the question that you asked about responsibility, and we'll come back around to that. But his position at the time was that the board didn't want to support what he felt needed to be done,
Mm,
and so he left, and he went to one of the most lucrative school districts in the state, in New
wow.
York State. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's a very wealthy district.
Wow.
And I do believe, though, that Terry Day also didn't have the confidence that the Rochester City School District could become good enough for his own children, because he enrolled his children in the district that he's working in now.
Okay.
You know, and so there was a lot to that, right? There was a lot to it, and in my view, to some degree, to some extent, he deceived the community. I remember shortly before he left, he was on, of all shows, he was on the Bob Lonsberry show talking about his commitment to Rochester and so forth. And
Mm,
shortly after that, he left.
mm,
Even Bob Lonsberry called him a hustler, right? And I understood that position. I don't know if that's, was his conscious intent, but I know things looked very, very strange. And some other things came out about him having a relationship with University of Rochester, who helped find that job for him. So
mm,
there was a lot underneath that situation.
okay.
And I remember at the time the school board president was Van White, who was saying that the district should have a right to sue Terry Day, basically. But apparently they didn't, because what he did was legal. It was in his contract.
Mm,
And so after that came Leslie Meyer Small. They chose Leslie Meyer Small. They, as the school board, they're the 7 people who
right.
choose the superintendent. But there was a lot to that situation also, because initially, after Dade left, there was this discussion about the need to do a national search for the
Mm,
next superintendent. And that discussion didn't last long before the board just decided they were going to choose Leslie Meyer Small without really any input from the community.
okay.
And she was here, what, I think 2 years, about 2 years, and then the board actually expressed no confidence in her. So she didn't resign. She didn't just leave. They more or less forced her out. They expressed that they didn't have confidence in her leadership. In fact, when she left, she was under a gag order. She couldn't even talk about the details of the circumstances that caused her to leave.
Mm. And now we have, I believe, it's Professor Carmine. Is that his name?
Yeah, he's not. I don't know about professor. Yeah, doctor. Yeah,
Dr. Carmine.
doctor.
Okay.
Yeah, he may be a professor. I don't know. I don't know
Okay.
him to be a professor, but Dr. Carmine Peluso, yeah, who is you could consider him, I guess, homegrown. I think he started as a teacher in the Rochester City School District, if I'm not mistaken. I know he was an administrator for a while. His wife is also a teacher in the district, and he seems to know the system fairly well. In my view, we are trying to work with Dr. Peluso, but in my mind, the verdict is still out, because I have some problems and issues with some of what I'm seeing. This whole reconfiguration scheme and all of
Yeah.
that, I don't know really where that's headed, and it's not brand new. That's not new. We've done that before. We've had that configuration that they're bringing into existence now. We've had that before. So I'm not hearing, what else are you going to do other than changing the configuration of the schools, making them K6, 7, 9, or 7, 8, 9, 12. What else? And I'm not
Okay.
hearing that. I'm not
Right.
hearing that. And you said you started this questioning with, who do we hold responsible? Legally, The 7 people who are the commissioners of the Rochester Board of Education are the folks who are entrusted by the state of New York to oversee the well-being of this district. So ultimately, the buck stops with them. Now, another thing is though, how do they get those positions?
Mm,
Because we elect them to those positions.
okay.
So ultimately, we are really accountable because if they're not doing what they need to be doing to improve conditions for our children, then we need to hold them accountable. And they obviously are not. I'm not saying they're not trying, but I am saying they're not effective. In
Okay.
fact, I'm going to go so far as to say they're dysfunctional. The president of the board has said that. Cynthia Elliott has said that. She has said that they've been dysfunctional in the past, and now they're no longer dysfunctional. But I don't know what has changed. I can't see what has changed.
Right. No changes. Now, if I could play devil's advocate for a minute, you said uh what was his name? You
Carmine Faluso?
no, not Mr. Peluso. I just had him here. Terry Day didn't want to enroll his kids in the city school district, or he
Yeah,
didn't.
he
But
did not.
when you look at some of the test scores,
Uh-huh.
you go to some of these test scores, you got teachers complain about teaching a ninth grade curriculum to kids who don't even understand a fourth grade curriculum. Reading and math and phonics scores are in 26% below average. How do we get these students and teachers and parents on the same page so that we're able to educate these children accurately?
Oh, big question number one. Let me say that what you just described is not new. That has gone on for decades. Even back to when you were in
Yeah.
high school in the 90s, we've had these low scores and so forth. This crisis is a very old crisis. It is deepening, right? And so when you ask this kind of question that you just asked, which is a huge question, if anybody ever says to you, well, all you got to do is run because they don't know what they're talking about.
Gotcha.
This is a very complex, serious issues. But the one thing that we do know is that if we're going to improve conditions, we have to organize, we have to collaborate, we have to build relationships. And that doesn't exist. But again, everybody has talked about it for decades. You know, that the board and the teachers and the support staff need to work with the parents and the students. That's the rhetoric that we hear.
Okay.
That has to happen. We got to find a way to build relationships, serious, ongoing relationships. The board would tell you, the teachers would tell you, everybody, the unions would tell you, everybody will say, we can't do this alone. But they don't operate, in my view, in ways that indicate that they really want parent and community involvement. Not,
Mm,
not in my view, right? It's sort of like
right.
we already got the plans and you just come and rubber stamp as opposed to having authentic input into the decision making and so forth. So there has to be an ongoing effort to really organize in a big way, in a way that we've never seen before, you know. And so who should be leading that? The people who we give the 6-figure salaries to. That's why they have those salaries.
Mm,
They're
okay.
supposed to be the ultimate experts. They're supposed to be the people who know. That's Dr. Peluso and his cabinet. That's the board. And the board don't get 6-figure salaries, but they certainly make a pretty good penny for a part-time job. In fact, the Rochester Board of Education is the highest paid Board of Education in all of New York State, with some of
Wow.
with the lowest scores, the lowest performing school district in the state, but has the highest paid school board. So ultimately, it's those 7 people, the superintendent and his cabinet, and all of us. But leadership has to come from somewhere.
Right.
And those who are supposed to know the most, who are supposed to be the most capable, the most knowledgeable, if they're not going to be the people who are going to lead, then who will? And so leadership is a major problem in this school district, in this city. It is a major problem.
Right.
Serious, committed, bold leadership, because we know that there are forces in this town that don't really want things to change. Why
Hmm.
would they?
Why
They're
would they?
doing very well as they are, as conditions are.
Right.
Well, you got to confront those forces at some point.
Right. Now you speak about the money. So the Rochester City School District just poured in, and I'm not pointing them out, $7 million into security, um, Rochester Police Department, they're going to have them dispersed throughout different schools in the city for obvious reasons. But yet, have teachers inboxing me saying, "Hey, I don't have chalk, I don't have erasers, I don't have paper, we don't have books, I don't have certain cheers." And I think you get a lot of pushback because when you start sniffing that money, a lot of people say, Howard Eagle was fine when he was talking about revamping education, but once you start talking about the money, I see a lot of people tend to shun away from you.
Sure, sure, no doubt about it. So there's been this narrative in the community, not only Rochester, but in urban communities across the nation, across the state and across the nation, that urban districts are underfunded.
Mm.
And that's been true to some degree, to some extent, that's been true. But when you have $1 billion plus budget, which the Rochester City School District has now, with less than 30,000 children, and you can't make any change at all, it's time for somebody to look at the money. It definitely is.
Yeah.
And board members would tell you, listen, we were in a community meeting last night. We had 3 of the board commissioners there. One of the commissioners somebody raised the issue, and the commissioner agreed that there are many programs in the Rochester City School District that are not effective. They shouldn't be funded, right? But there's no real, that I've seen assessment of the effectiveness of those programs, and they're cutting them if they're not working, right? So money, we do have to follow the money. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of money being squandered in this school district. Everybody knows that if they're paying attention. And we're at the point where good intentions don't cut it. We got to have good results. Right. We have to have good results. And when you have programs that have existed for years and you pump millions of dollars into those programs and you can't show any concrete, significant, measurable results, you don't have to be an accountant or some mathematician to understand that it's time to cut that program.
Right.
So there's a lot going on in terms of the money in this school district. Now, I'll tell you this, because we had a little bit of discussion about this before we started. The notes that went back and forth about what teachers are sending you and so forth, right?
Right.
I've never had this problem that I've heard teachers complain about in terms of basic materials like chalk and paper and eraser. I've never had that problem when I was in the school district. Maybe things change, but I always had all the supplies I needed, and rarely I didn't have to come out of my pocket. Many of them say that they come out of their pockets, unless I wanted to, right? If I wanted something additional for my students, I would purchase it. But I had all the basics. I don't know if that, but even when I was in the classroom, I heard teachers complaining about that, but I never understood why. Because I always got an order form in the beginning of the year. I ordered the supplies. Whatever I ordered, I got them. I got the supplies. So I can't speak to it. I'm not familiar with that, even though I've heard it. I've heard it for years, right? That we don't have basic supplies. I certainly, though, we'll say this. When you have $1 billion budget with less than 23,000 students, nobody should be complaining about basic supplies.
Exactly.
We could say that.
Okay.
So if there are teachers, and this is another part of, in my view, this is another part of the crisis. In many cases, educators won't come forward and express to the public what's going on. It's almost like they are afraid. I don't know if they're afraid of retaliation, or I don't know what it is. They don't want to be put under the microscope. But the public needs to know these things, if they are true, if they are real. If it's real that you don't have chalk and you don't have paper and whatever else you need to serve your students, you need to tell the public. Then we can hold the people accountable who are supposed to ensure that you have those things.
Correct.
I just cannot imagine. Again, I keep saying, with $1 billion budget, and that's going to change, because some of that money was due to COVID and so forth. Okay. So they're not going to continue to get a $1 billion budget. But a central question, an essential question is, what have they done, and what are they doing with the $1 billion that they do have? Right. And I just don't see a whole lot in terms of concrete, measurable, permanent change. I just don't. And I know that I'm not everywhere and I don't see everything, but I pay close attention, very close attention.
Now, they also have a bus shortage, and one administrator in the district was quoted as saying, just pack the buses. Just pack them as best you can.
Yeah. So again, that's a complex issue, right? And that issue got really bad during COVID, right?
Hmm.
But it was already a problem. And one of the problems is, many of the young people in the Rochester City School District and other urban districts are now being siphoned off by charter schools.
Right.
So when that happens, you still have to provide transportation for those students, and they're going here and there, different locations and so forth. So that taxed the transportation system. In addition to that, during COVID, many bus drivers quit. They
Right.
quit. And many of them never came back. So there's a shortage of man and woman power, even in terms of operating the
Right.
buses, right? And the Rochester City School District has a contract with the transit system and so forth.
Hmm.
And some people have argued in the past. I don't know enough to say one way or the other, but some people have offered have suggested in the past that if the Rochester City School District would purchase its own buses, that it would do much better than contracting with this city transit system.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not sure, but what I do know is that there have been problems and issues around transportation in this district for years. There's this rule that if you live, I don't know what the number is, 1.8 miles or something like that, or less from your school, you can't get transportation. Meanwhile, we know that many of the young people, even if they live 1.8 or whatever that number is,
Hmm.
they still have to walk through things that resemble war zones to
Exactly.
get to school
Exactly.
because of the rampant violence and madness that's occurring in the community in general. So it's very problematic. See, this is what I'm saying. These are the kind of issues that if we're so smart, right? We're so educated, right? Because you
Hmm.
asked me at the beginning, what's the purpose of education?
Hmm.
We're so smart, right? We know so much. We got so much knowledge, and we do have a lot of knowledge collectively. Why can't we figure out this transportation issue?
Right. Yeah.
That's the example. That's just one example.
Yeah, you got kids, and you made a good point. Walking through war zones, I talked to a young lady. She has to take 3 buses to get to school, and this is in Detroit.
Yeah,
Going through seeing all types of horror. Mom doesn't have a vehicle, so just for her to get to school is a task itself. Now,
sure.
when I was coming up going through school, we wouldn't dare speak back to teachers in a disrespectful way, curse at teachers, cuss at administrators, cuss at the century. We respected the lunch lady, the janitor, everyone.
Sure.
Have we taken the power away from teachers as far as being able to? Because when you say punitive, people get scared.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear about capital punishment. Capital punishment can be considered you writing on a chalkboard. Anything that requires a physical act can be considered capital punishment, right? But have we put the students on the same level as the teachers? Because when I was coming up, we weren't on the same level as the teacher. We couldn't talk back to teachers.
Yes. Again, a very complex question, which does not have a simplistic answer, but we need to understand all the different aspects of what you're asking. There is a problem in urban education with so many young people just being suspended, right? Just sent out of the school with nowhere to go, and they end up in the streets, they end up in jail, they end up in trouble, right? So there are young people who need to be removed from classrooms. They are disruptive.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
they need to be removed, but we can't just turn them to the streets, right? So we need support systems. See, this crisis is so deep. The
Yes.
the school system in general is still trying to operate the same way it operated 100 years ago, when we didn't have some of the problems and issues that we have today. We didn't have massive discipline issues, as you said. Even in the time that you were in high school, you
Right.
didn't have massive discipline problems like they exist to today. So that's part of today's reality. You have to adjust to that somehow. And I don't mean to make it sound simplistic,
Right.
but the pattern has been just suspend them, send them
Mhm.
home, right? And they can go wherever they want to go, and they do. and many times end up in trouble. Also, no instruction follows them in terms of, for the 5 days that they're out or the 10
Mhm.
days or whatever, no instruction at all. So they are falling further and further behind. So then, because of that, we begin to see in the 90s, in the late 90s, going into the early 21st century, we begin to see this whole push about uh, trying to make sure that we're not feeding into the school to prison pipeline. Is
Mhm.
what, and that's real. That's
Yeah,
real.
that's
That's
real.
what we're
Yeah.
describing, right? When young
Yeah.
people are just turned away and they don't have, they end up in trouble. They end up in jail. They end up, with a record early on, and they repeat those offenses, and before you know it, they're inadequate. Right. So, and that's a long-standing pattern. So
Right.
people became more and more concerned about that, and the need to address it, that we can't just suspend them. We need more than that. And so they
Okay.
began to try to develop these mechanisms, but nothing has been developed that I'm aware of that's adequate. Again, some timeout rooms or whatever they're called, right? These
Yeah.
places, right? But when they go there, the chaos that you saw in the classroom continues. So we're not dealing with the underlying issues and problems.
Mhm.
We're not now. And then came the whole push about restorative justice. This is to speak to the question you asked me about whether or not students and teachers have been put on an equal level, right?
Mhm.
I wouldn't say that they've been put on an equal level, but the whole concept behind part of the concept behind restorative justice, restorative practice, is this idea that when adults and young people have conflict, have problems, they should sit down and talk it out, and
Kumbaya. Yeah.
yeah, all of that stuff. And
Mhm.
I don't know. I hear mixed. I hear mixed uh, versions of whether or not that works. I have heard from some people who I trust in the community that restorative justice works if it's done right.
Okay.
But then they will qualify that by saying often it's piecemeal, it's not really implemented properly.
Right.
So I just don't know. Again, that's another one of those programs that millions of dollars have been pumped into that over the
Mhm.
last 10, 15 years. It just has not produced anything.
Mhm.
They talk about suspensions are down and all
Mhm.
of that, but it's like, the natural curve where things go up, they come down, they go up, they come down. That's what it's been like.
Right.
Suspensions come down a little bit, 2 years from now, they're back up to where they were. And that has gone on for years and years, and everybody knows it.
Right.
So I don't see any of that as panacea, as the answer, right? We need to do more. We need to keep thinking about this, keep trying to figure out what the solutions are, which again goes back to the importance of those relationships. That's
Mhm.
why we need those relationships with educators, with parents, with community members, with students, so that we're constantly working on these problems and issues.
Right.
They're not going to disappear. They're not going to melt into oblivion. And we can't work on them, once every 6 months and think we're really good, because the crisis is too deep for that. It needs to be ongoing. The work needs to be ongoing. So I
Right.
know I have a tendency to ramble. Make sure
No,
I'm
no, we got time.
okay. Well, make sure I'm answering your questions
Yes,
though.
sir. Yes, sir.
I wouldn't say that young people have been put on the same level as teachers, but there certainly are many things that are accepted in the classroom today that would not have been accepted in the past. And some of this has to fall on individual educators too,
Mm.
because well, you kind of knew how I ran my classroom.
Oh, yes, sir.
We,
Yes, sir.
we make it clear from there, because see, sometimes there's this philosophy is important in education. I've seen a lot of educators who have this philosophy about, oh, this is an inclusive classroom and we're going to decide what the rules are together. No, not in my classroom. I'm in charge.
You in charge. Exactly.
You understand that
Exactly.
from day one, right? I'm
Exactly.
in charge of this classroom,
Right.
right? We could say what the rules are. You could tell me, what you think and so forth. I may consider it, I may not.
Mhm.
Depends, right? It's not like I'm completely closed to your ideas, but we don't get to run it together. No, no.
Right.
In fact, that's part of my responsibility
That's right.
as a classroom teacher.
Right.
So some of this falls on individuals. It is so important when you step into a classroom from day one to set the tone. I've watched this pattern over and over and over again, where, because as you know, young people are very, very brilliant. They will fill you out. That first few days of school, you think everybody's wonderful. because they're just trying to feel you out to see what is really happening with you and so forth.
Right.
And so they will, they will kind of play you, so to speak. But if you are firm from day one, you can always back away from the firmness as you begin to develop relationships.
Right.
But when you go in with this idea like, oh, we're just gonna all be
Be
friendly, and
friends. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
no, and
Right.
they love it. 2-3 weeks into the school year, they're in charge of the classroom, and you
Exactly.
can never get it back. You can never get it back.
Exactly. I'm glad you said that because the word authority itself stems from the word author,
Huh?
meaning I write the rules. I dictate what goes on here.
Yeah,
So a lot of teachers are saying that that authority has been taken away from them. They can't intervene. They're not allowed to say, and I'm talking about pre-K to maybe seventh grade. They're not allowed to say different things to students. When you're having teachers tell me they're having 5 to 8 room clears per week, how if you're in a 50-minute class and you're spending 40 minutes trying to restore the order and chaos, who's learning?
yes, yes, no, absolutely. That is that. I can't say it any better than you just said it. You cannot educate without order. Order is a prerequisite
Right.
for effective education. There's no doubt about it. There's no two ways about it. Order is a prerequisite. And I do believe that some of the authority that teachers had in the past has been usurped. I believe that, you know. But then the question becomes, what are you going to do about that? If
Right.
you are the classroom practitioner and
Mhm.
you know best and so forth, no matter who it is, if it's administrators, if it's central office, if it's the superintendent himself, they're not in the classroom, you are.
Right.
So again, we back to the issue of organizing, right? If you know what's best practice collectively as educators, as classroom practitioners, then you need to organize yourselves and make it clear.
Mm.
You know that certain things are not going to be tolerated, period.
Right.
Right? So we get these two extremes. The one extreme I was talking about earlier, where we just dump them on the streets. The
Hmm.
other extreme is where we let everything exist in the classroom.
Yeah.
Everything goes. Right? It can't be either of those extremes. You can't educate under those conditions. Either way,
Right.
if the students are not there, you can't educate them. And if they're there and everything, and it's utter chaos all the time, you still can't educate them.
Right. You talked about the school to prison pipeline for a second, and statistics and data shows that if a child is not reading proficiently by the fourth grade,
Third.
third grade now, wow,
Yes. Yes.
they will absolutely be in prison or on welfare.
Yeah. Well, that okay. So let's be clear. It doesn't. That's not. It's not that it is. That it is a definite predictor.
Hmm.
It's a likelihood. It's a
Okay.
clear likelihood that they will end up in jail.
In jail.
In fact, when people who build jails are
Mm.
deciding how many more cells they're going to need,
They look at those numbers, huh?
yes, that's one of the indicators they look at.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we've known this for a long time.
Wow.
And so it is a predictor, but it's not deterministic. Doesn't mean that every child who
Yeah.
doesn't read by third grade will end up in prison.
Gotcha.
Doesn't mean that, but it means the likelihood that you will is significantly increased.
Right. Gotcha. What can we do to get parent? I'm going to bat for teachers. They saying the administrator are giving them lists of things that they need to teach the child, but these lists contain things that the child should already know coming from home: how to
Yeah,
behave, how to
yeah,
listen, how to sit down. I came from a good home, a good mother, so I came to school with winter coat, winter boots, hat, scarf, gloves, full stomach. I didn't act out in school. I didn't have a reason to act out in school. So
yeah,
they told my mom, say, hey, all the other kids going crazy. They told my
yeah,
mom, hey, something must be wrong with your son. He's not, we got to put him in special ed. He's not, I'm a happy child. I came from my mom worked hard. I didn't have to do that. I had everything I wanted at home.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So even going towards high school, same thing. I'm testing. I'm testing. There's nothing wrong with him. They sending me to psychiatrists and nothing wrong with this kid. Still kept me in there for whatever reason. As they classified me as a slow learner, said I wouldn't go to college. I needed to go to Job Corps. I have a BA from Stillman College. I have an associate's degree from Mary Holmes College. So
Yeah.
the things that
Oh,
they were saying didn't pertain to me. But what is one thing that we can do to get parents more involved in their child's education?
So, again, if somebody says to you, well, all you got to do is don't listen. They don't know what they're talking about. This is complex. And I'm going to talk about it and give you my view on it in a minute. But let's go back to the labeling, mislabeling, because that's still happening a lot where young people, early ages,
Hmm.
6-year-olds, 7-year-olds get labeled as, having so-called disabilities and so forth. And people obviously are not understanding what they're seeing in many cases. That's a culture issue to some degree, to some extent. Not
Mm.
entirely, but to some degree, to some extent it is.
Right.
And that's something that needs to still be addressed today because we end up with many young people in special ed programs who don't belong there. There was nothing wrong. They had no disability. They were
Right.
misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
And that needs to still be addressed. But now, I don't know of any one thing that we can do to get parents, help them become more responsible, more accountable. I know that needs to happen. If I was pressed, if somebody said, well, you got to give one thing,
Right.
I would say, and it sounds rhetorical, but it's what I really believe. I would say they got to be organized. That's what I would say. Now, look, we many of our young people are coming to school from the beginning in bad shape. We
Bad
know it.
shape. Yes,
They're
sir.
not being taken care of
Mm-mm.
physically, emotionally.
Mm-mm.
Many of them are in bad shape when they arrive at school.
Mm-hmm.
It's unrealistic that individual teachers can address all that. We know that's just not even possible.
Right.
But it goes back to what I said earlier. If you got an institution that's still operating the way it was operating 50 years ago, when you didn't see this, you didn't see this for the most part. If you saw it, that was an exception. It wasn't no widespread reality
Right.
like it is today. But if you know that's the truth, and it is the truth, many of our young people are arriving unprepared,
Mm-hmm.
physically, emotionally, academically, unprepared. The institution needs to adjust to deal with that in a systemic way to the degree and extent that it can, not to take on the responsibility of the parent, but to try to mitigate those circumstances to the degree and extent that we can, because they're not going to go away. And we could say all we want. These parents need to do this, and they do. But just because we say it doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Right.
So we need to always stay focused on the child.
Right.
When we see children in that condition, I hear this a lot, even from educators, and it breaks my heart to hear this from educators. Well, if the parent's not going to do it, what you expect me to? Well,
Mm.
I do expect you to do something. That's part of your job as an urban educator. Urban educators got to know more than how to teach social studies, math, science. No, there are things that come along with urban education that you need to know. And you need that extraordinary commitment as an urban educator, in my view. You do.
Right.
But at the same time, there has to be balance because we don't want people just, running themselves ragged, right? Just
Mm-hmm.
just burning themselves out. But you do need extraordinary commitment, and the approach needs to be systemic. This is not about what I, as an individual educator, could do. The
Right.
question is, how does this system function in a way that we can help mitigate some of those circumstances that we know are coming to us? They're
Right.
coming, no matter what we say. Those
Mm-hmm.
circumstances are going to end up in the school door, in the classroom, in the
Mm.
office, wherever, in the hallways. They're going to end up there. Now, that's not to excuse parents of their responsibility. I'm not one. I don't make excuses for parents. Need to be accountable. Need to be responsible.
Right.
How can we? For me, the question is not how can we make them, because we can't. Because
Right.
if we could, we already would. I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But can we help them? Is the question.
Gotcha.
And I am convinced, still and to this day, a little book, about 100 and some pages, written by Nathan and Julia Hare, called The Hare Plan.
The hair plan. I mean,
The
right.
Hare Plan. And this book was written, I think, in either late 80s or early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about the fact that back then, conditions have become so bad that we can't leave the education totally in the hands of parents.
Right.
We got to help them. We got to try to support them, but that we can't dictate to them. We can't go into their homes trying to dictate to them what they should do. We should go asking, how can we help? And they talk about real ideas in this book. They talk about a concept they call para-parent. Para-parent. So this is the idea that, many of our parents are uneducated,
Yeah.
right? That some of them are messed up. They're on drugs. They're on alcohol. Some of our parents are really messed up. We know
Hmm.
that, right?
Right.
And they're not going to be accountable. They can't be. They need
It
help
can't be.
themselves in many
Right.
cases. So the Hares they argue in that book, or not necessarily argue, they present the idea in the book that we can seek parents' permission to act on their behalf legally. Legally get their permission to act on their behalf so that we become the support that their children don't have.
Hmm.
You see, this is the thing that I was mentioning. I didn't finish the thought about breaking my heart when I hear people talk about, well, the parents not going to do it. What do you expect me to do? Yeah, I expect you to do something, because when we look at those young people who do not have those support systems, who are suffering and so forth, they need our help more than the ones who are ready to learn, who have the support and so forth.
Hmm.
And in my view, it is part of our responsibility to get that support under them systemically to the degree that we can. I'm not moving to this position that we need to be everything and do everything, because, people will, when you talk like I talk, that's when people, they move to that idea that, oh, you're saying that the teachers got to do it. No, I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, that systemically we can do a better job of supporting our young people.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Gotcha. Now, when we talk about the reading levels and the grades being down, systemic racism, things of that nature, we look at blacks in particular, poor, especially in the city of Rochester, 34%,
Yeah.
poor. I think they have something like 31% are homeowners compared to 72%, of their counterpart who own homes. Kids coming to school not being fed. Moms probably want, I believe every parent loves their child. They probably have to work 3 and 4 jobs to make ends meet, and they can't really be involved. When my son was in school, we had this thing called Google Class, and I was able to go. It's like a portal. I was able to see him being educated in real time.
Okay.
I was able to see if he was not turning in the work. Should we be pushing for, but you need the internet to do stuff like that? Should we, like you said, we need to help a lot of these parents? Should we be pushing towards like free internet, free, things that can help parents to help their children?
Yes. Yes. Well, I don't know why we would not do that, to make the technology accessible to as many people as possible, if not everyone. However, we have to acknowledge that no matter how much access you give to people, if they can't read, the
Right.
access means nothing.
Right.
And so, see, it's almost like we don't make this connection. Many of those young people who can't read today, who are reading 3 and 4 and 5 grade levels behind,
Mm.
and many who will walk across the stage as graduates and still not be able to read. See, that's the systemic stuff that I'm talking about.
Exactly.
They become the adults who are in the households with the children that we're talking about who have chronic issues and problems.
And they go on to produce children just like them.
Generational.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. We need to understand that. So, yes to technology, but never to see technology or any other single thing as a panacea, as like
Right.
that's the total answer. It's not. It could be part of the answer. It should be part of the answer, right? Those
Right.
who know how to use the technology and just don't have the financial means to, to have it, we should provide it. Yes,
Right.
and city this rich can do that.
Right.
Yeah, yes, and we should. So technology though is becoming problematic in some ways, right? The Google Classroom thing you mentioned, I think that
Mhm.
still exists. I hear teachers talking about it and so forth.
Okay.
But many of our parents can't access it. They don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the know-how how to
Mm-hmm.
use it and so forth. Others don't, for whatever reason, they just don't. But technology, as it was being developed, there was this idea that it would be the great equalizer. Technology will. It hasn't turned out that way. There are some really serious drawbacks with technology. One is, you mentioned literacy, and let's talk a little bit about that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But technology is connected to that. More and more young people don't have to write. They don't
No.
have to, because they can use the computer.
Right.
We were talking last night at the community meeting about, and people have been talking about it forever. It's not just that we, raised it for the first time last night. Young people don't even know how to write in cursive. They're not taught that anymore. So if you can't write in cursive, how you sign your name on your check?
Mm.
You know,
Mm.
so that's partially because of technology, but it's connected more than anything to literacy.
Right.
That is a key issue now. The governor, New York State Governor Kathy Hochul, did her State of the State address a couple of days ago. I think it was Tuesday earlier this week. That was one of the things she talked about is literacy, right? That she
Right.
wants to get back to the science of literacy, and people call it back to basics, right? Back to really what it is back to phonics. I mean, I'm
Right.
not a reading teacher, but we know that phonics is mastering phonics is essential to becoming a good reader. They
Right.
moved away from that and started talking to stuff about whole language and mixed approaches. So now
Right.
there's a national conversation going on about the need to get back to what they call the science of reading or
Right.
back to basics. And that is just key. That is just so key. But we need to understand literacy is not just about reading. It's not. It's not. It's about decoding. It's about your command of vocabulary. How many words do you know? How many
Exactly.
words do you come to school knowing? And there's been research around this and in terms of poor Black children, poor Hispanic children, poor children in general. We know that they enter school with massively low vocabulary
Mm.
compared to their middle class
Yeah.
peers,
Whose vernacular is way up here.
and that matters. That absolutely matters, right? So that's another example of how do we get. We know that that's going to arrive at our school door.
Right.
How do we mitigate that? See, as opposed to just operating like that's not even happening,
Right.
right? Like they are where they should be. That's how we start, right? We start like they're where, but they're not
No.
in many cases, and we're not talking about an exception. We're talking almost about the rule.
Right.
That's becoming the rule for
Do
poor Black children, poor Hispanic children, poor children in general. And there's a lot of reasons why people want to take the position. Well, that's just because their parents are not taking the time where their parents can't. In many cases, they don't have the skills.
right.
No, that's not to make excuses for them, but that's just the truth.
Yeah.
And that's widespread. It wouldn't be such a big deal if we were talking about just a few, just an exception. This is widespread. And we need to acknowledge these kinds of things and adjust to the degree and to the extent that we can. Literacy is about writing. Literacy is about speaking.
Yes,
It's
sir.
not just reading, right? Calling words.
Mm.
And so finally there's this national conversation starting about it, right? So many young people have been disserviced because of this. And let us hope that this is going to, amount to a real significant change in education across the nation. Let's hope that.
Right.
But if I'm looking at New York, that doesn't seem to be the case.
No, I'm looking at these numbers. No, sir.
I mean, even you see the governor in her State of the State speech talking about it like it's such a big deal, but she's giving $10 million for literacy. What the heck is $10 million across New York State? And that money is going actually to unions to educate people in terms of the so-called science of reading, as they call it.
Mm-hmm.
Back to basics, back to science.
Okay.
And so, I mean, I don't know how that could possibly translate into widespread significant change. I'm just talking about New York alone.
Just New York, yeah.
But the same kind of pattern, you see it being repeated all across the nation.
All over. My God, Philly. I haven't cried since my mom passed away 4 years ago. But talking to staff in Philadelphia, it was unbelievable. But you see with this parent, she said my son took the SAT and the SCAT and was required to write a paragraph in cursive, and he panicked because he didn't know how.
No one ever taught him how.
No, my nephew drew me a picture. He's a great artist. He drew me a picture, a nice picture. So I said, "Hey," sign your name in cursive. He looked at me like, "What's that?"
Yeah.
Never even heard the word before.
Yeah.
He said, "We keyboard in school." I'm like, "Y'all don't write?" He said, "No."
Yeah. See, that's an example of how technology is really having a regressive impact Not, and so we need to raise this. So see, educators, parents, community, we need to raise this issue. It's just plain and simple. We need to begin to teach children how to write in cursive again.
Again,
Period.
absolutely.
Period.
Absolutely.
No ifs, ands, and buts about it.
Nope.
So hopefully we'll move toward that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if we will, right? Things don't look good, right? Because there's a lot of rhetoric. But when you watch what people are doing, and this is back to budget, just follow the money. How
Follow the
much, if
money.
you say that something needs to happen, how much resource are you putting toward making sure that it happens? That's the critical question.
My mentor always tell me we pay for what we value. We
Yes.
pay for and you speak in volumes when you're not paying teachers accurately or what they should be getting paid. But you'll pay an athlete 200-300 million to dribble a ball down. Not saying they shouldn't get paid
Yeah.
to dribble a ball up and down the court.
Yeah.
But some of these people are working second jobs, again, coming out of their pocket for school supplies. One thing
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you before I lose my train of thought here. What was it? It was about the reading. It was about the reading. I done lost my train of thought here with the school system. So they have one school in Texas where the entire ninth grade is in special ed. The whole ninth grade in
Wow.
special ed.
Wow.
Now
Wow.
that goes to what you said. Do they get extra money or funding for keeping kids in in special ed, or how does that work?
Yes, they do get extra money. I'll come right back to it. You mentioned Philadelphia. I just read an article. In fact, I just scanned it. I haven't read it yet. I want to read it. The state of Pennsylvania I believe somebody's suing the state of Pennsylvania to say that they owe the schools $5 billion or something like that. I just saw this headline earlier. I haven't read the article yet, but when you were talking about Philadelphia, I thought about that. But yes, when you are a special ed student, when you are entitled to services,
Mm.
additional money comes with that because to provide the services, you got to have money.
Okay.
So yes, absolutely, no doubt about it that there's additional resources. There are additional resources that come along with people being disabled because the idea is you need to address the disability. You need to, if as much as you can, correct the problems that exist because of the disability or the challenges, not necessarily problems, but the challenges that exist because of the disabilities need to be addressed, and that costs money.
Right. Is there a teacher shortage?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, no doubt. This is really kind of scary when you think about it. For decades, again, for decades, you've been hearing this rhetoric about the teaching force is graying. They say it's graying, meaning it's getting older.
Mm-hmm.
We've known this for decades. Fewer and fewer people than ever before, perhaps in the history of this nation, are going into the education profession
Mm-hmm.
because so many other professions pay more, and because of the challenges of being
Mm-hmm.
an educator these days, especially a classroom teacher. So it's like a crisis. It is a crisis that's going to get worse. In fact, it has become so bad that, and I'm sure Rochester is not unique. We got some people, in my view, in the classroom right now who don't belong there. They're long-term substitutes and so forth. It's like they're in desperation right now.
Right.
They're in a desperate state for teachers. It is a serious, serious problem. And again, in my view, if we take that seriously, we should see massive resources being pumped into trying to develop. We talk in Rochester about growing our own, right?
Right.
And there's this program at East High School called the Teaching and Learning Institute. It's been over there for about 25 years, maybe longer. And they've produced a few teachers over the years, but that kind of program needs to be ramped up. We need to put major resources into that and begin to think about it really creatively. Begin to try to get young people interested in the profession early on. So it's one thing to talk about we're going to find the teachers, but it's a different thing to actually build the teachers,
Mm-hmm.
to actually, how am I trying to say, develop them, develop the teachers. Try to either find young people early on who are interested or who you can get interested.
Right.
So we're not doing, in my view, nearly enough to address that crisis that we've known about for decades.
So there was a mass exodus, and I believe it was Houston, Texas, where almost 50,000 teachers quit.
I saw you put an article up about that. I saw it. Yeah. Yeah.
And pay was on the list, but it wasn't the first thing. The
It
first
was
thing was
discipline, probably.
this discipline, the
Yeah.
discipline that
Yeah.
not being able to control their classroom. As we talk, when you come in there and you try to establish, say, this is my class,
Yeah.
not able, their hands were tied. So
Yeah.
what do you think? One of the, and everybody that's trying to call into the show, sit tight for a second. You'll be able to
Okay.
call in.
Yes. Please let people call. Yes.
Oh yeah. Call in and you can ask Howard you and anything you would like to ask. The numbers on the screen. What's one of the things you think we can do to get people to get back into education? Because I hear a lot of people saying we need more black male teachers. Is that
Yeah. Yeah, we do. So again, we're talking about a systems problem, right? It's a systems issue, right? If we two things, you begin by talking about the massive leaving, those who are leaving in mass
Mhm.
numbers, right? So we need to think about how do we stem that, right? That's a systemic issue, right? How do we restore that order that people want, that they're going to teach and so forth, and that they deserve? And you see, that's not a classroom by classroom uh, decision. That the whole school needs to be thinking about what is our plan to make
Mhm.
sure that we have discipline in our classrooms and in our office and in our hallways and in our cafeteria. See, it has to be a systems approach,
Right.
right? Now, in terms of getting more, and especially educators of color, because even now the percentage of educators of color in the public education system is minuscule. I think it's less than 10%. And
Mm,
black males is really minuscule.
mm,
So how do we do it? We got to give incentives, right? Special incentives to people, right? That you come into this profession, we give you a bonus. But we don't want just anybody. We want a commitment on your part, right?
right.
So this is tied to what I was talking about earlier. Let's go looking for those who may be interested, but let's also go looking for those who we can get interested, who
Right.
we can help them to become interested in this profession. And then if we can help them become interested, let's address the things that we're going to have to address to keep them, right? Recruiting is one thing. Retention is quite another.
Okay.
And so we're going to have to do some things, but I don't want to say, I don't want to give you this pat answer like, well, all we got to do a lot of different things.
Right.
But this goes back to, again, how our conversation began, right? It's about building relationships. It's about ongoing thinking, right? You asked me right from the beginning, what is the purpose of education? The
Right.
purpose of knowledge is ultimately what it informs you to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's the ultimate function of knowledge.
Right.
Right? So we got to be thinking all the time. We need literally a movement, ongoing efforts, not rhetoric. I'm not talking rhetoric.
Right.
Ongoing efforts to address these many problems and issues. And so we got to think about it. How do we attract more people to the education field, and how do we attract those who we know are, critically missing, right? Black men, Black women, Hispanic men and women, Asian, Native people. What do we need to do? We got to think seriously about that, though. It can't just be some rhetorical question.
Right. Absolutely. When you talk about what we were talking about earlier with the kids acting out in school and class and stuff like that, a lot of them, that's the only tool that they have in the toolbox. They come in, a lot of them, homeless, coming from homes where they're not eating and things like that. Is it a way that we can get, like you said, teachers? You're gonna have to be counselors. You might have to be a mother. You might have to be a father. You might have to wear different caps in order to get that student, to grasp the concept of what you're trying to teach them, and also behave.
Yes, yes. No doubt about it. I can't say it any better than that. So a lot of that behavior that you mentioned is masking. It's
Mm-hmm.
masking what's really underneath that. In many cases, not in all cases. In some cases, students don't have no excuse, right?
Right.
But in many cases, there's pain under there like that we wouldn't believe.
Right.
There are issues going on that we wouldn't believe what some of our young people are going through.
Yeah.
You got to try to get at that. But now you raised a question that's related to something else. And we haven't talked much about this in the education field. The way that educators are being educated, right? At college, right? What they're teaching you at college about the profession, right? About what to expect and so forth. It's out of sync. We know it's out of sync. So that we need to talk about that too. We need to talk about changing the teacher preparation programs so that you really understand what you're stepping into.
Right.
And you understand, what that you do have to be to some degree a counselor, maybe a mother one day, a father the next, an uncle, a preacher, or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
It's not just this idea. I'm going to go and deliver the curriculum, and that's it.
And that's it. Right. Yeah. Because you have a lot of first year teachers like, oh, the hell with this.
Yeah.
They didn't prepare me for this.
They say it. They actually say that, and that's what I'm talking about. They literally are shocked when they get there. They can't believe what they're seeing. Right. Because nobody told them that in college.
Right. But, by taking the discipline out of class, like we were talking about, you do kids, this is just my personal opinion, you do them a disjustice because when they get out in the real world, they get pulled over by a cop. You can't talk back. Well, you can. It's going to be consequences.
Sure.
You're on a job. You talk back to your boss. It's going to be consequences.
Sure.
So why are you allowed to do that in the classroom?
Sure. So we have to have, there's no getting around it. We have to figure out how to have discipline in the classroom. Right. But I'm saying to you again, it's not just restricted to the classroom. Everywhere you go, and I would never have a school. I'm just saying this hypothetically. In my school, everywhere you go, there will be discipline. There's discipline in the hallways. There's discipline in the cafeteria. There's discipline in the office. No matter where. See, it's not about this just what's happening in my classroom. That's a mistake that we made. That's not a systems approach. A systems approach is how do we bring order to this school? And how do we keep it? And the larger question really is how do we bring order to this district? Right? And keep it.
Right.
And that's a serious question. It doesn't have any kind of, again, no panaceas that all we got to do it. No, but dang it, what are we going to do?
Right.
If we're out there to do nothing, we might as well pack up and go home.
That's it. Yeah. Now the district, they follow the guidelines of the state, correct?
To a degree, to an extent, yes. To a degree, to an extent, there are mandates from the state that all districts have to follow. And some of those mandates are unfunded, right? They tell you got to do these things, but they don't give you the resources to do them. They tell you can't do certain things. But now look what we're back to. We're right back to relationship building. Because if you got strong relationships between teachers and administrators and parents and students, you're going to even confront the state and say, we understand, right, that's a mandate, but it's one that doesn't make sense for us.
Right.
We need to get rid of this.
Right.
But you're going to confront, see, these things all work together. You're going to confront your legislators, your state legislators and so forth and say, you got to develop a law that allows us to do this or that takes this away, this thing that's impeding our ability to be effective educators.
Right.
But you got to be organized to do that. But that needs to happen. The fact that the state dictates some things that districts must do and can't do is a problem. Because some of those things, they're just not in sync with what needs to happen.
Okay. Just not in sync with what's going on.
Gotcha. No, they're not.
What's going on in your district in particular? They're like the school that I graduated from, John Marshall. They're changing the names of the schools now?
Sure, your school, the school you went to don't even exist no more. There's no John Marshall High School anymore. I forgot what's over there. For a while, they had the Links program or something in there. Wow. I don't know I really don't know what's there now. But it's not John Marshall High School. There is no more John Marshall High School. That's gone. The building is there, but the name of it is something else. And I don't even know what it is now. They changed the name so fast. I'm not sure. I think 2 or 3 different programs are there, last I heard. Wow. But right now, there's a plan to reconfigure the schools. And the board has already voted to close a number of schools. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but they're going to close some of the schools. And that has to do with the fact that many of the young people have gone to charter schools. So the enrollment is down. The enrollment when you were in school was somewhere around 32, 35,000 students, somewhere like that.
Mm-hmm.
Today it's 23, I believe, or less.
Mm.
Might be less than 23,000.
Mm.
Those children went to charter schools, many of them, the ones that did drop out. They went to charter schools.
Okay.
Therefore, they don't need all the space. You hear them talk, they got rhetoric, you know. You
Yeah.
hear them talk about the footprint. That's what
Mm-hmm.
they talk about. You know, our footprint. What they really mean is we don't have enough students to fill these buildings.
Right.
And some of the buildings have been modernized because they had a major facilities modernization project in this city over the last, 10, 15 years.
Right.
I don't know what it was, some $1 billion or something that was pumped into modernizing facilities. So the idea is some of the older buildings, right, that haven't been modernized are going to be the ones that close. But that means you're going to shift students around now. You're going to move students around to different buildings, and you're going to rename some buildings and so forth. But the fundamental idea is supposed to be reconfiguration. We're going back to K6, 7, 8, or is it, yeah, K6, 7, 8, and then 9, 12, right? Elementary,
Right.
middle, and high school, which the Rochester City School District has had before. When I was teaching, that configuration existed.
Right.
But they are operating out of this idea that this is going to help people become more organized as it relates to being effective in delivering instruction and so forth. But I said to you earlier, I'm not hearing the details of that. What I'm
Right.
hearing is our students are going to have access to the most modern facilities and so forth. And that's good. They should.
Right.
But that in and of itself doesn't change what's happening academically, not by
Right.
itself, right? What
Right.
else is going to be done? Especially with the teacher shortage that we just finished talking about. So what else? What else is going to be done? I'm not hearing those details.
Right.
But that's a major upheaval that's beginning to happen. That's going to happen beginning next school year,
Hmm.
and so that is going to be. It really is going to be chaos for some families because they
Wow.
got to change the way their whole lives are organized. I mean, in terms of their work schedules and where they take, how they get their children to school and all of that. So I don't understand. You know, maybe I just don't know enough about the so-called reconfiguration plan, but I don't understand how this is in and of itself an improvement. I do understand that you can't keep operating the same number of buildings for 35,000 students now that you only got 23. I understand that, right? I do understand.
Right.
You know, so I mean I don't know what all that means. I'm not clear. But I'm watching. I'm paying attention, studying, you know, to see if that really is going to produce change. I'm not convinced at this
Right.
point.
Well, we had someone has a question for you here. She
Sure,
says,
sure, absolutely.
do you believe that some international education system have better ways of dealing with some of the issues you mentioned? I never heard of the international educational system. I'm not familiar with that.
I'm assuming that she is asking about other countries, but I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe she
Okay.
needs to clarify. And so there are reports, you know, that education systems in other countries, especially like some of the Asian countries, Japan is often mentioned, uh, uh, even China, you know, but even some of the Western European nations are considered to have um, generally better education systems than the United States.
Right.
I'm not any kind of expert on that. I don't know.
Okay.
But you know, I just don't know, and I'm not sure if that's what she was asking or not. I'm just assuming that that's what she's asking. If there are models in other parts of the world that are
Right.
maybe, but I'm always, if that is what she's asking, I'm always very skeptical about this idea, even in the United States, that we're going to go study what somebody else is doing, and then we're going to bring that back to and apply it to our district. Not that there are not some things that might work, but in general, I think that we need to develop our own unique solutions for our own unique problems. I mean, they're the same problems that everybody else has, but
Right.
the particulars, right, are different. The specifics, the details are different. And I think that's where the focus needs to be, especially in a community like this. This is a college community.
Yeah.
How many colleges are in the Monroe County area?
Good
We got
colleges.
brain power on steroids.
Yeah.
Supposedly we do. And some of the top colleges in the nation, the U of
Hmm.
R, the RIT, right?
Hmm.
St. John Fisher, we're supposed to have some top institutions, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I'm just skeptical about going to other places and studying what other people are doing. That don't mean that I'm closed-minded.
Right.
We sometimes we do need to look at other stuff, but we need to be very, very careful, in my view, from what I've seen through the years, about trying to bring something in its totality and lay it on top of our problems.
Right.
It
Well,
usually doesn't work.
right. When you look at Gates Child Eye, Spin Support, Henrietta, Honey Eye Falls, Canandaigua, what are they doing so different and so right that they're producing great outcomes that the city school district is not doing?
I'm sure they're doing some things different, but in my view, that's not the essential question. The essential question is, how is it that the conditions in those school districts, in the, I think it's something like 21 or 2 or maybe 3 public school districts in Monroe County, in addition to the ones you named, of course, the Penfields, the Pittsburghs, the Brightons, so forth and so on. They're all in Monroe County, all public school districts, but a fundamental difference is the conditions that they have to deal with. In those school systems, from the beginning, most of the people are middle class folks who are, economically solid. Some of the where we and I'm really careful with this word, but so-called values, right, that we talk about that don't exist in urban school districts, and so they do exist in those school districts, right? So
Right.
the conditions are fundamentally different than they are in Rochester. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not doing some things that Rochester is not. I believe they are. Where if you talk about discipline, even though they have less discipline problems, that don't mean that they have zero discipline problems, but
Right.
they handle them differently. They won't tolerate it. But see, they also got those relationships that I'm talking about.
Right.
They got parents and educators and teachers and administrators and everybody, community members working together, and
Gotcha.
they're serious about their education for their children.
Right.
They are organized. And parents in those districts make it clear that we don't care who the school board is, who the union is, we run things. These are our children.
That's right.
Now, parents in urban districts are not organized to that degree, to that extent.
Mm.
But we need to be careful. See, because people will move to this idea, well, that's because they stupid or they lazy, they don't want to be organized. No, what happened? See, this is a historical question that you're asking.
Right.
Because the pattern that you're describing in terms of the surrounding suburban school districts doing well, in most cases doing well, in the center urban district not doing well, that pattern exists all over the United States of America in every direction, north, east, south, and west. If we're gullible enough to believe that that's just one big coincidence, then that's what we are, gullible as hell. No, that is a product of past policies, practices, procedures, rules, regulations. That's the institutional racism that we're talking about. That's how it plays out. So we have to ask, what is the origins of the public education system? How was it developed in the beginning? And what has happened, right? We talk about this group of people I'm working with in the Rochester City School District in the REAL team, the Racial Equity Advocacy Leadership Team. One of the things we're doing is finally going into schools and trying to educate people around anti-racist education, beginning with making sure we have a common language. But one of the things we talk about in the process of doing our presentations is the history of public education. And for the first time, African-American people in particular had widespread access to some rudimentary education was after the Civil War. And what we saw generations of people, mothers and fathers and grandmothers and children, all in one classroom trying to learn together, had a thirst for knowledge. This was widespread. couldn't get enough, wanted all the knowledge they could get. So how do we go from that kind of situation to the situation that we see today, when many of the young people are pushing the education off the table, don't want it? So the question many people will ask is, what's wrong with them?
Mm-hmm.
In my view, and in our view, the people I work closest with that I just mentioned, that's the wrong question.
Mm.
The question is, what happened?
What happened?
Yeah,
Exactly.
what happened?
I'm glad you asked that. And I'm going to put this out here. Might offend a few people, but it is what it is. Prior to Brown versus the Board of Education, prior to integration,
Yeah.
how were we learning? How were we doing
In general, we
in
would do
general?
better. We would, and people will argue against this and so forth, but the evidence is there. It's there. We were doing better. I went to one of those all black schools from first grade through like eighth grade, Phyllis Wheatley High School in Apopka, Florida, a few miles from Orlando, Florida, 13
Mm-hmm.
miles from Orlando, Florida. The school is still there. It's an elementary school today. But at that time, it was an all black segregated school. I had some of the most wonderful teachers in the world. I'll never forget Miss Brown. I won't forget Mr. Fillmore. I
Mm,
won't forget Mr. Goodman.
mm,
I'm 69 years old.
mm.
I still remember those teachers.
That's the impact.
I know what a committed teacher is supposed to look like.
Mm,
And we had inferior resources. Sometimes we actually got the books when the white school, which was uptown and our school was downtown, when they got new books, we would get their old books. But I remember teachers putting those books on the shelf and saying, we're not even going to use them. And you talk about, coming out of your own pocket, bringing in supplies that they purchased, the state of the arts,
mm.
because they were committed to us like that. But that was a different time. That was also a time when most of our teachers lived in our community.
Okay.
They were right in our community. They were
Mhm.
part of our community. We grew. It was nothing to see your teacher at the barbershop, at the grocery store. We all lived together, right?
Mhm.
That's before there was a large black middle class, which is another part of the problem that we're experiencing today.
Right.
Many of our educators, whether they're black, white, or whatever, Hispanic, whoever they are, many of them are to a large degree detached from the communities in which their children live. The majority of their children live.
Just like the police.
Yes, same thing. Absolutely. It's the exact same dynamic. It's the
Right.
exact same. And people will argue that don't matter. Yes, it does. Yes, it does matter. It does matter. That's part of the cultural situation that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
But did I answer your question? What was
Yeah,
your question?
you did. I just want to know why was the push for integrating schools so
Oh,
important?
yes. So I love Thurgood Marshall, the late Thurgood Marshall, and the NAACP legal defense
Mhm.
team. I love them for the work that they did, but they made critical mistakes. And when people hear me talk about this, it's like, now you saying Thurgood Marshall didn't know what he was doing. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying he made a mistake. Him and his team, Mr. What's his name, Hamilton out of Howard University, who was one of Thurgood Marshall's mentors. Charles Hamilton, they made a mistake when they began their push to equalize resources in education. That's what they were trying to do. They were
Okay.
trying to equalize resources, right? Because literally, you can go into history and see in the time period I'm talking about, when I was in elementary school in the 50s, the school uptown that I mentioned in the town I lived in,
Mhm.
they got more per pupil than we got, a lot more. The
Mm.
teachers made more. The white teachers made more than the black teachers in the same public education system. And this existed all over the United States of America. So Thurgood Marshall, Charles Hamilton, Houston, and others were trying to bring about a situation where the resources would be equalized. When they first thought about, these were strategists. These lawyers were strategists.
Mhm.
When they first thought about it, what they were saying is, if we start talking to them about integrating the schools, they'll give us
More
equal
money.
resources.
Okay.
They didn't even intend to do that. That was a tactic in the beginning.
Okay.
But once they started going down that road, they then saw the possibility that they could possibly integrate schools. And that's when they took the Linda Brown case of Topeka, Kansas, along
Mhm.
with a bunch of other cases that people don't even know about.
No,
Just Linda Brown case was the one that was, the one that they used as
highlighted. Yeah.
the top plaintiff. Yeah. But that's when they began to believe that, well, maybe we can actually bring about integration. And they went down that road and they quote unquote won. Remember, in 1954, in the Brown versus Board of Education case, the Supreme Court of the United States of America said that all schools would be integrated with all due speed, with all deliberate speed, would be desegregated with all deliberate speed. That was 1954. What was happening 10 years later in 1964? Had they been desegregated with all deliberate speed?
Mm.
Absolutely not.
No.
They were still as segregated as they were 10 years earlier.
Mm.
It wasn't until the 1970s that we began to see some semblance of so-called integration. Well, how about this? Today they are fully integrated, are they not?
They fully integrated.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Schools are more segregated than they were 50 years ago.
Okay, okay. I misunderstood your question. Right,
No,
right.
yeah,
Okay.
no, they're not. They're not desegregated
Mm.
because people who did not want their children, I mean, we have to tell the truth about it. White people who did not want their children to go to school with black children, they began to set up their own separate school systems and so forth. And this was also the time that suburbs were just now beginning to develop and to expand. There's a whole history around this, right? But
Right.
we need to know this history. So
Right.
as those suburbs were expanding, people set up their own separate school systems. They fought for boundary laws that wouldn't allow people to cross over if they didn't live in their towns, to come in their towns to be educated. This was all done by design. It was all by design.
All by design. That's what
Yeah. And
that's
the
what I
schools
kind
are
of
just
figured.
as segregated as they were 50 years ago. So that's why I make the argument that Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund team made some mistakes strategically, because a lot of that strong relationships and the cultural bonds, and so all of that was lost to
Right.
integration. That was lost.
Let's go there. Do you think integration destroyed the black community?
It did a lot of damage. It didn't destroy the black community completely. Even until this day, even with all of the massive dysfunction that exists in black communities across this nation, I wouldn't argue that it's totally destroyed, right?
Right.
Not totally. But integration, yes, it absolutely caused a lot of devastation. You talk about this minuscule percentage of black educators, black teachers and administrators, small percentage, less than 10%.
Mm.
Well, when we had all black schools, all of the educators were black. Thousands of black teachers and administrators lost their jobs as a result of the Brown versus Board of Education case. That's another part of the flawed strategy.
Mm.
Why? Because as you begin to finally integrate the schools, many white people took the position that we will not allow black people to teach our children. Plus, if you're integrating schools, right, you're putting schools together, you don't need as many educators. So last hire is the first fire.
Right.
And we know in general, white teachers have many more years of tenure than did black teachers
Right.
and administrators. So we lost thousands of black educators during that time period. Also, schools were anchors of communities, as they should be.
As they should
A
be.
lot of activity went on around the school. There was always something happening at the school that helped to bring bonding and cohesiveness to the community. That's lost now.
Yeah, just like this church used to be. That's lost.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, there's no doubt about the fact that integration, so-called integration, which never happened, not on a massive scale, absolutely had a negative impact on the black community. There's no question about it.
Got you. I mean, I kind of figured that, but for the listeners out
Oh,
there,
there's no
especially the young
question.
audience,
I can say this because I've looked at the history. I'm not making it up, right?
Right.
You could go and examine the impact, that it had.
Right. Wow. Well, we've been going for what, an hour now?
Yes, sir.
Nobody else called in. I thought we was gonna get some callers calling in, but nobody called in. That's fine too.
I was hoping so also. I don't. Can you tell if you have viewers or not?
Yeah, right now. Oh, now we have any more viewers right now. We did have five, and
Okay.
people dropped off. I think a lot of people were at work that I reached out to. A lot of teachers wanted to come on, and they were afraid of. I said you can remain anonymous. You don't have to be on camera, but they were afraid of the backlash from their district. So I
Oh
understood
wow.
that. Yeah.
See,
So
that to me is really sad too. And I have to tell you the truth, right? I kind of hold our colleagues in not in contempt, but we can't be chicken as educators. We're supposed to be the best and the brightest that this society has to offer. Certainly, we know how to organize ourselves in a way that people who want to retaliate against us for taking principled positions that are in the best interest of our students, that we know how to fend that off. See, something that I always think, I know teachers know how to organize. One of the reasons I know is because here in Rochester, for example, and Rochester is not unique in this sense, when teachers are in negotiations with the district, and the district doesn't want to give them what they consider to be a fair raise, they
right.
turn out by the thousands.
Mm,
They come out by the thousands and make a demand. So why would we not do the same thing in terms of issues that we know are in the best interest of our students?
right.
I just don't get that. And I'm sorry, in my mind, it raises the issue of commitment in my mind.
Yeah.
So I don't know how else to view that. So it's sad to hear that people are afraid to come on, because of retaliation and so forth. But if it's real, I don't advocate economic suicide either. I
Yeah.
don't
No, not at
advocate
all.
that. So
Yeah. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your time, your knowledge, your expertise. Hopefully we can do it again. Anytime you ever want to come on here, you got anything you want to talk about, education, whatever it is, you want to get your word out. This platform is free for you. Come on, do whatever you want to do.
I appreciate that. I really do, and I'm going to take you up on it.
Yes, sir. Yeah, anytime you want to get your word out, because I watched one interview. You say you had to force your way in one board meeting. They didn't want to let you in.
Yeah, well, we got in, but they wanted to put us out. So
Yeah.
that's a long story too. And
Okay.
that's not the only board meeting where we've encountered that. So
Yeah.
that's a long story. Maybe we'll talk about that at some
Okay.
point. You know.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate you. Bless me with your presence. And again, anytime you want to come back, just hit me up and we'll have you on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you. And I'll send you this video. You can send it out, share it.
I absolutely will. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a great day, sir.
All right. You also.
Yes, sir.
Bye bye.
Bye. All right. Great conversation with the one and only Mr. Howard Eagle. Appreciate everybody who stopped by and watched the show. Uh, Good conversation, good topic, important topic for the kids, not only of the District of Rochester, but throughout the country, throughout the nation. Um, we got to do better. In order to do better, we got to stick together. With that being said, I appreciate y'all for stopping by. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you want to help support this machine, you can even send $1. The Cash App is the same as, well, it's not the same as the channel. There's no anonymity TV is the Cash App. I appreciate y'all. Everybody have a great weekend, or weekend that is, and peace, love, and I'm out.